Okay, so this is Königgrätz. It's a CSL game that is not yet published. This is a pure play test. It seems like a weird thing to do, but it's the only way you can get me to play test things, is to just do my video treatment of them, because I just don't have the time to put the kind of effort in for what I consider to be real play testing, which is, breaking the game out and giving it 3 or 4 playthroughs, maybe even opposed. I assume most playtest groups involve playing it with other people to get impressions from various, and you have like a playtest lead or whatever. Well, the world is different than it used to be, and maybe that's hard to do. And the designer asked me, after doing a couple review videos for some of his other things, to put the same kind of critique capabilities into this. We'll see what it's like. Now, we're going to do a normal intro, but a little bit of copy editing is going to be happening in here, as I found some errors in the rulebook. But I still like to follow my normal format. This is a design that the original apparently was a Mark Herman design for Gettysburg and Waterloo, neither of which was aware of before this, and kind of intrigued, because usually I like to keep up with the designers that I really like, and I really like Mark Herman. A lot of his stuff is very innovative and everything, and where they're going now. And this one, those games just flew under my radar completely. I don't even know who published them, but we got this one, and you can see a pretty small map, not a lot of pieces. Looks like a light magazine game, or as I got it, kind of a folio type thing. So pretty easy. There's not a hell of a lot in the way of rules either. Runs here at 12 pages, relatively large type, actually very large type, and really, some of me kind of objects to using up this much paper because of the point size. But I gotta say, I can actually read this without my reading glasses part. And it's readable in low lighting. So maybe as we age, for the simpler games, it's not a bad idea. And the rules seem fairly clear for the most part. The actual layout of the rule book, I'm a little iffy on this. You have all these really easy to distinguish section numbers. There's nothing wrong with it. But it takes a little getting used to, and I'm not sure how well this kind of format will work in terms of remembering where things are. I feel personally that like little blocks of text with headers are easier, but this may be a little bit too much, but that's just personal taste. All right. Königgrätz itself is sort of the big battle of the Austro-Prussian War of '66. Now, it's an interesting war. You're talking about, and a battle scenario on that excites me right away, because you're talking about a period where, honestly, both sides have improvements technologically. The Austrians didn't really keep up in terms of the tactical side of things, as to what they wanted to do, as to how these new weapons would impact, usage. Similar to in the Franco-Prussian War, where the French had some really great technological improvements, and they kind of squandered them. The Prussians, on the other hand, had already tested out their needle gun, some of the newer artillery. They had tested it out in the Danish wars, and then had developed the general staff and had, really a strong background. But in some ways, their equipment was actually less modern or less effective than some of the Austrian equipment. For example, the Austrian rifles had better range, lower rate of fire, but the Austrian tactical doctrine involved like bayonet charge, which meant that they ran right into those high rate of fire, less accurate guns that the Germans that the Prussians, I guess, at this point still are using. Likewise, the artillery situation. The Austrians had, they had a very mixed artillery park, but in general, their newer stuff had longer range, but they weren't as convinced on the breech loading and just all kind of weird stuff. They also had a commander who this designer seems to think is pretty quality, this Benedict guy. Other sources of opinion that I've seen, a little less so. He's seen as overly cautious and resistant to some of the changes. So he may be actually at fault for, the Austrian failure in ways that don't represent. Now, this actual representation, though, although it's a single day of battle, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., I guess. Does that make sense? These can't be night turns. These may be you're not getting your pieces back turns. Just too early a dark. And it has no effect on play in terms of that. There's no nightfall rules. Where was I? Jesus. I don't know. I was going to pontificate about something or another. Oh, yeah. This is not going to really showcase those weapons differences, because essentially what you've got is counters that have fairly limited factors on them. Now, the actual values on the counters, they have a number. That's their movement rate. And I haven't figured out if this is my setup. It can be set up in march formation, and these are all set up in combat formation. The other side is the march formation. That'll show a higher number to give it a higher movement rate. The combat capability is represented by the little stars. It's basically their combat quality. And, simple enough. You're not going to be adding factors, and trying to get an odds table on this. It is a very different system. So that was an infantry unit. Cavalry are a little different. Their two sides are fresh and exhausted, which is just different movement allowance, but also other effects. There aren't a hell of a lot of markers in the game. There are headquarters units, which I think that's one. It's got a star on it. What the hell? I don't understand them fully. Because they get kind of placed, and they're just sort of the locus of command. They're not something you can capture. They don't have any fighting capability. They just sit there, and you'll see how they work. We'll get to them there. And what else? They count as markers, not as units. And you have a couple of things like this commitment marker used to show whether or not you're throwing artillery into a given fight. Both people select secretly, and then it's represented. You have number, quantity there. What's this? This game turn marker. Oddly enough, this has a Prussian game turn and an Austrian game turn side. This may work out okay, but there aren't really separate player turns. This isn't an I go, you go game, so I'm a little weirded out by the fact that exists. I'm going to use it, because it'll indicate who's got the next movement opportunity in the pulsing if I have to walk away in the midst of a turn or whatever. And then it's possible that if one person passes, the other person gets a certain amount of actions afterwards. And that's represented by that last marker here. These are just for the artillery ammo. And then there's some blanks. The dice, I provide my own dice as just a little folio type thing. Well, also as a playtest copy. I'm not sure it would come with dice. There's no real reason. We all have enough six-siders, right? Okay. So the Austrian, let's start digging into the rules a little bit more, because I want to catch where I've got weirdnesses here. We've got a glossary with some kind of weird, more terms are being abbreviated than I'm thrilled about. I don't mind ZOC, EZOC, DRM, mainly because they're so established. But when we start getting things to AAC for Advanced After Combat, I got kind of a question of how many times are you using that term within the rules, and did you really need to shorten it? But we've got some others that are here. So blown units are units which essentially have been routed off the map. They've been so disorganized they're no longer a functioning unit. But they can reorganize it over the course of the battle. We need cavalry in the glossary, I guess. I don't know. If it's kind of weird, because there's some places where the game obviously assumes you know a fair amount about wargaming and will be able to make the right decisions on some things. And maybe I'll note some of those. There aren't a hell of a lot. Efficiency rating is the ER. This is going to be the number of stars on a unit. It's basically just a plus to combat. You have zones of control and zones of influence. Zones of control are going to be adjacent to a unit. Zones of influence is 2 hexes out. I find games that handle zones of influence can sometimes be something that's like that many, a couple hexes out instead of right next to it. Can be kind of tricky to deal with and easy to make errors, just game errors. You don't notice that you're violating something. We'll see how that works. Men with rifles, okay. That's about it. Okay. Yeah, so, when you have these, you have this big header, and then you have almost no information after it. It feels weird. That's all. I don't, and again, I don't know what it would do for my ability to remember where something is, to look it up, but it's a small rule book, so probably not too big a deal. You have infantry and cav. Infantry are in march or battle formation. Now, here we have 2 examples, one of an Austrian unit in battle, one of a Prussian in battle. I think it would actually be useful to show one in march and one in battle. Likewise, an exhausted and an unexhausted cav. I'm not really sure we need to see the differences between, Austrian and Prussian units. I don't know. There's room, there's plenty of room here. There could be 4 counters if really needed. Okay. Headquarters don't function as units. They have a command range. Okay, here's the copy editor coming out, which limits unit movement and determines where blown units return to the map. Additionally, headquarters can be either normal or battle mode. If they're in battle mode, they have a smaller command range, but give a star in combat. And the number on them is their command range, I guess. Again, unlike many games will give you not just the picture, but it'll give you a little arrow telling you, hey, this is your movement point, this is your ER. This indicates that you're in mobile. or whatever it is, normal mode, and there would be a picture that shows battle mode, which is different, which shows this. The command radius would be explained here. That's, again, it's just sort of assumed that you'll figure this out. Now, it's not hard, but it might be a tricky thing for somebody who's brand new to gaming, you know. And this is not feels like an introductory type of game, so maybe a little bit of effort towards that would be a good idea. Okay, Austrian has 2 headquarters, and the Prussians have 3. Okay, so now this is kind of weird. So we have Prince Friedrich Karl commanding the 1st Prussian Army, Karl Eberhard, and Crown Prince Frederick, not Friedrich, commands the 2nd Army. Whereas, and we've got it here too, but if you look at the counters, well, you have Prince Fr Karl, that could be anything, but here it's Crown Prince, and that's very clearly Friedrich, not Frederick. I would stick to one naming convention. I don't know why you would name the Crown Prince Frederick and not Friedrich, or, you know, it just seems to me that you'd want to keep the same naming convention. Okay, artillery. Okay, so the artillery rule is a little weird. There's something a little fuzzy about this that bugged me. Both players receive ammo points, AP, which may be spent by either player to receive a +2 to their respective attack die rolls. All good. When both players commit artillery, see, other than the fact that this is under the artillery heading, somehow I think there should be a maybe spent, should be maybe committed or something like that. Just like the link between spending and committing didn't seem clear. Now maybe I'm being a little harsher because later on I may fuzz over stuff like that and not have worried about it. But I know when I was first starting, I was kind of like, yeah, since I'm kind of reviewing, you know, since I'm kind of playtesting this and doing some copy editing type work, well, yeah, that just feels a little funny. And that's something I would certainly have noted and sent back. Okay, an artillery duel is triggered. Both players roll a d6. The higher result gets the artillery bonus, with the Austrian winning ties up until turn 5, and then after that, the Prussians will win ties. Now, that's where the color comes in. Turn 5 is where the Prussians win the ties. That color coding maybe should be called out here in this roll as well, just to let you know why it's there. Having something like that drilled in as a secondary factor can help people remember things. An attack is where one player designates a single friendly unit to engage in combat against a single adjacent enemy unit. Players roll a d6 and each modify their result, with the lower result losing the engagement. So you might have to roll a dice off for who gets the artillery benefit, and then you'll have to roll a dice off for combat itself. The lower result loses the engagement. Attacks are always voluntary. Cavalry may only declare attacks against other cavalry, except for death ride charges, but may defend normally when attacked by infantry or cavalry. A death ride charge is a special cavalry attack that simulates suicidal charges made by mounted units against enemy infantry and artillery. Death ride charges allow cav to attack infantry. If the attack is successful, the losing side must lose 2 AP. And I hear AP and I want to say action points because, you know, I would almost rather this was just like ammo or something like that, because there are games that use action points, and but 2 AP from their AP total in addition to other combat results, indicating that, like, if the cav charge, they're able to capture some of the artillery, either some of the guns and wreck them, or some of the ammo itself and blow it up, whatever. And the charging cav unit is blown. Well, that sounds reasonable. However, blown in this means disorganized off the map. So it could be a little interesting. If the attack is unsuccessful or a draw, the cav unit is instead eliminated. Risky action. And it doesn't appear there's anything special you need to do about it. So like the cav units may only declare attacks against other cav units, exception death ride charges. Well, they can declare combat against anything. There's just a higher risk to them if they attack infantry. Attacker infantry flank support during combat. Now, is this the right place for this stuff? This is covered. God, my throat starts to kill me down here always. I don't know if there's like mold. It's the grass, I think. I've got like, crap on the floor from when I've done cuttings and stuff. Something hits me down here. During combat, each attacking friendly unit in an enemy zone of control of the enemy being attacked grants the attacker a +1 DRM. I don't know. I don't know if it's necessary for this stuff to be here and later. I don't know if it's bad. Certainly doesn't hurt me, but I kind of like repetition, but we'll see. Both attackers and defenders get die roll modifiers depending on the presence of friendly cav units. And, here we're looking at... Well, first of all, we have a reference to friendly at 3.6. That may be going overboard with references. I'm not sure friendly even needed its own rule, but okay. I guess if it's going to have its own rule heading, it's fine. Is that here? Yeah, it's over here. So, I don't know. That seems to me going overboard, but anyway. I'm someone who always complains in the other direction, so I should shut up, right? Okay. Yeah, so for example, this isn't really telling me much. This is telling me a +1 for an infantry unit in the enemy zone of control, but it's not telling me what multiple ones might do or anything like that. And I feel like it's leaving me with more questions. And this one really doesn't tell me anything. Friendly and enemy. Units in the game are Austrian or Prussian. The player with the Austrians considers the... Yeah, I mean, Again, sometimes it feels like they're spelling out the obvious in such detail, but then at other times, like with the numbers not being indicated and stuff like that, it feels like, wow, stuff that even people who are kind of used to it might not, used to wargaming, might not really capture from the graphics. This arrow means I'm on march. Yeah, maybe, okay. But yeah. Okay. You use single 6-sided die each for attacks, artillery duels, and death ride charges. How are death ride charges different from attacks? Well, this one limitation, I don't know. Players find it useful to have a die available for each player. Yeah, I would assume so. Zone of control. All friendly units projected zone of control in the 6 hexes adjacent. All enemy units project an enemy zone of control in the 6 hexes surrounding. Okay. Whenever a friendly unit enters or begins a movement phase inside an enemy zone of control, it cannot move for the remainder of that movement phase. The friendly unit may only leave an enemy zone of control due to an attack result or during the organization phase. This is really well done. This is the level I like, right? It's telling me everything I need to do. No. And importantly, it's telling me beyond the absolute minimum, it's leveraging into, hey, when can I do those things? So yeah, this is a well-written piece here. Now, I think most of the main rules are lifted, according to the designer notes, almost directly from Mark Herman. So blame him for the things I'm attacking here. I don't know. Okay. Zones of influence. All friendly infantry units project a zone of influence at a range of 2 hexes from the hex they occupy. All enemy units projected enemy zone of influence at 2 hexes. Only infantry projected a zone of influence or enemy zone of influence. Great. Here it tells me what something is and what it does. Here it tells me what it is, but I got no idea what it does. And I'm just like, an extra sentence in there could make this as useful as this, but I don't know what they do now. Even if it's a little vague. And again, I don't know what they do. I've read these rules, but had it told me there, it might have stuck better to see it twice. See the terrain effects chart for all details relating to movement and combat. Okay, well, where is that? It's not here, it's not here, it's not here. It's not here. Ruh-roh. Okay. Well, I'll see it when I see it. I don't see one. Oops. And I don't see one. No, is there one here? Yeah, I see no terrain effects chart whatsoever. Might have to ask the designer about that. Maybe it's on the back of the map. Yeah. Okay. Unit, and clearly the back of this would be a great place for it. Back of the rule book. Probably intended to be in one of those places, just isn't there. I might make some shit up, but now we spell out the terrain effects. Units must spend an extra +2 movement points in order to cross a swamp hex side while in march formation. I'm guessing that's these. These are forests, I guess. Towns. Who knows what they do? Units in battle formation are not allowed to cross swamp hex sides except at a bridge crossing. Swamp hex sides block zones of control and zones of influence. Units may not attack across swamp hex sides. Units forced to retreat across a swamp hex side, not at a bridge crossing, are instead eliminated. I'm not a big fan of pictures, but if this is truly to be an introductory level game, which a lot of the wording seems to indicate, I would think about putting a picture in to show the blocking of the zone of control, zone of influence aspects. If it's meant to be for wargamers who are experienced, etc., well, there's a lot of other places where maybe things are too explicit, but I think it's fine to leave it out. We've seen this before, but yeah. Bridge hex sides. Bridges allow units to cross swamp hexes without paying any extra movement point. Zones of control and zones of influence do not cross bridges. Units may attack enemy units across bridges, but the attacking suffers a -2 DRM. Be nice if we had a terrain effects chart. Only one unit can attack across a bridge hex side. Adjacent friendly units cannot assist in combat unless the assisting friendly unit is on the same side as the bridge as the enemy being attacked. Are there any places where there are multiple bridges leading into one hex? No. Close. Wow. A unit in march formation whose entire move is on connected road hexes spends a half movement point to move each hex. This is a road movement bonus. Roads are depicted in brown, which is to say something. I don't know what brown is, which seems weird. But I've got orange here. I've got dashed gray here. I've got a grayish, looks like a rail line here. I think they mean orange. Or maybe I'm colorblind. Where are we? Yeah, so the any other trails depicted are simply for historical flavor. These appear to be the major things, so I'm going to say those are the roads, but again, who knows? Because gray looks closer to brown to me than orange does. An empty hex is a hex with no units or markers in it. No exceptions, okay? Does that matter? I mean, you know, it's a nice blatant statement, but it's kind of along the line of a unit in a hex is a unit sitting inside the hex. I don't know whether this is going to have any importance at any other point. And, well, might be better off in the glossary if it's used elsewhere. If it's not, gosh. Units may not cross nor retreat across a major river hex side unless used along a road or bridge. Now, all the roads go across with bridges. Probably could get rid of that road or part. Units forced to do so are instead blown. Zones of influence and zones of control do not cross major river hex sides. Did we know that already? No. Okay. Towns provide defending units with a +2 DRM in combat. They have no other effect. I feel like the TEC is being described here piece by piece. Okay. Still be nice to have a copy of it on the back or whatever. But yeah, so no movement effect for that. Woods cost 2 movement points to move into, and units defending in a woods hex receive a +1 DRM. Okay. So I'm guessing the TEC just hasn't been designed yet. The fact that it's all being spelled out, is that overkill? I don't know. I really don't know. It feels like it with all these bars going across. Again, that's maybe a personal thing, but I do feel like reading through the rule book, and there's room for it, it's a small rule book overall, not a lot of words being used here. Reading through the rule book and capturing the whole of the game is actually a really, really valuable thing. I know some people don't, you know, they'd rather zone out on charts or whatever. I kind of like it to be in both places. I like it to be in the rules because when I sit down on the crapper and I read the rule book, you know, I kind of get it all. And then if there's an easier to digest mechanism for it. Now, as opposed to the NBS version 3, where like the rules give you one way of doing things and then the charts formulated in a different, more visually appealing sort of way. In which doesn't really look the same at all. That disturbs me. They give you like a procedural way of doing things and then just a chart that gives you it, and oh, that throws me for a loop. Okay, I need to take a break because my poor throat is of course dying. But we have gotten halfway through the rule book and, you know, I think gotten some of the basics. We still don't know how combat... We got some ideas of how combat works, but we don't know everything, right? I have to mention something. I think the same designer used this system in a Mars Autour game from the Franco-Prussian War. But I think there's been some modifications to it since then. So, but again, if you kind of like what you see here, there is a game available out there on a similar subject that has the same kind of system. So that should be kind of neat. After a little bit of a break. Oh. All right. So, sequence of play in the game, spelled out. And by the way, I haven't noticed any other issues. I marked them where I did. If you see some faint pencil marks and I ignore them, that probably is one. Okay, all cav units on the map recover from exhaustion unless they're in a zone of control or enemy. Zone of control or zone of influence. I think this is the big cause, the big effect of a zone of influence, to tell you the truth. We'll see. again, you know, they tell you what a zone of control does. They don't tell you what a zone of influence does, and that is disturbing. that should be remediated. Headquarter placement. Starting with the Prussian player, each side first removes and then places their headquarters marker, apostrophe S should be there, on the map. Players then, oh, I'm sorry, no. Players then alternate back and forth, placing their headquarters markers one at a time. Okay, so it should not be there. It should be a one of there or a headquarters marker. The headquarters can be placed in either normal or battle mode. It must be placed within 3, 5 for Benedek and Moltke, hexes of a friendly unit which is currently not in an enemy zone of control. If this is not possible, you can put it anywhere on the map on any empty hex. Now, empty hexes have to be empty, so you can't put it on top of someone else's headquarters. An HQ is a marker and not a unit. You know, once placed, the players may not move or interfere with them until the next HQ placement. They can't be eliminated. They can be walked on by the enemy, whatever. Blown unit return. Starting with the Prussian player, players may return a maximum of 2 blown units to the map in any empty hex adjacent to a friendly headquarters that is not in an enemy zone of control or enemy zone of influence. Okay. All of this is clear. I think we're okay with this, yeah. If more than 2 blown units are available for entry, the opposing player chooses which 2 come back into play and the rest are eliminated. That's interesting. The opposing player chooses. He chooses which ones to allow to come back, i.e. that's odd. Austrian bombardment placement. We have this Austrian bombardment shit here. Oh, yeah. Starting on turn 1 and each turn thereafter, the Austrian player can place this mark onto any empty hex on the map that is at least 3 hexes from a Prussian entry hex. The Austrian player chooses to place the bombardment marker. They have to pay 1 artillery point. And its effect, which should be, maybe not because there's a sequence of play, but its effect is to create a zone of control in the hex. There might be a reference to that role in here. It is generally useful to have the sequence of play have references into the places where the actual rule is. Now, I don't think, like, things like headquarters placement, the whole rule is here, so, you know, but where there's anything else, it's probably a good idea to put the reference there. Unlike what was it? Friendly and enemy units, yeah, those had their references. That, again, overkill to me, but now it seems a little odd that you'd want to create a zone of control so badly that you'd spend an artillery point for it. Supposedly this kind of interdiction was how the Austrians used most of their artillery. If that's the case, and it's a bad idea for the players, which it feels like it feels like not something I want to do, at least, I'm not sure that you should have that much control. I think you should kind of like have to place this or something, or have the points split. I don't know. Just my own thinking in terms of like a more scripted situation to give you more accurate. You know, because if you're not going to follow their doctrine on artillery, maybe you shouldn't follow their doctrine on infantry usage, in which case, instead of charging, they would stand at a distance, since they're mainly on the defensive in this situation, and, you know, pick off the Prussians from range, thereby increasing the value of, you know, what, all their infantry units, maybe? I don't know. All right. Battle formation. Any unit in an enemy zone of control or enemy zone of influence must... formation organization. So this is the organization phase, which was discussed before. That probably ought to be called out. If it's the formation organization phase, that should be specified. Because that's the only thing that's happening here, is formation organization. Each unit that's not in an enemy zone of influence may be flipped from its battle formation side to its march formation side, or it can remain in battle. This is the only time you can flip from battle to march. Any unit in an enemy zone of control or enemy zone of influence must remain on its battle formation side or be flipped to it. Once you're on battle formation, you remain that way for the rest of the turn. Okay. Not harmful to remind me, even though it's clear from the cases. It's just reiterating. Exiting enemy zone of control. The Prussian player may select a friendly unit in an enemy zone of control and perform a retreat. See the combat result rules for retreats. Yeah, it would probably be more useful to give me a number, because, how do I find that? I flip to here and look, and I don't see retreat. I don't see combat. And I'm left with, what? The Austrian player then select a friendly unit and can do the same. This continues to alternate between players, with each side selecting to retreat a unit. Once a player decides to decline, they can no longer retreat any other units, but the other player can retreat the rest of the units that they wish to. Okay, movement. Like I said, this game is not normal. Units can move multiple times and fight multiple times. What the hell that is? It's not a delivery truck. In sequence until both players pass. Now, that's not entirely true. Well, they can move multiple. It's not unlimited. It's unlimited until one player passes. We'll see. Okay, now we come to some weirdness. Reinforcements enter the map. Reinforcements are units that are eligible to enter from off-map. The march formation side of each reinforcement unit is printed with the turn number and entry hex letter. Actually, both sides of the unit are printed with setup as well as reinforcement values. So, like this is printed 1ABC. I assume that means it comes in on turn 1 on one of these 3 hexes. It's also on this side. Just to be picky. And that's fine. Reinforcement units must pay movement points for the first map edge hex they enter, as well as any subsequent hexes they enter. If multiple reinforcements are able to enter the map on the same turn, units with the lowest ER, effectiveness rating, must enter the map first. Not sure why that's important. It might matter in some cases, but because it doesn't seem to be that they come in as a chain. If an enemy unit occupies an entry hex, the enemy unit must immediately execute a retreat exactly as if it had lost an attack. Units that may move onto the map in the current turn but are prevented from doing so for any reason, are kept off map until their specified entry hex is valid. I'm not sure how that's possible, but we'll see. Units may not use another entry hex other than the one specified. You cannot voluntarily hold counters off the map. And then there's players love to try to interdict enemy reinforcements on the map edges. You can't. Okay, well, if you can't, how would units be prevented from doing so by any reason? There's got to be some means, or that's unnecessary. And that's kind of the... What does that mean? It might be clogging things up in such a way that, all the reinforcements, and I think they're all Prussian, are all entering in the same place, and there just aren't enough spaces. So far, we haven't seen anything about stacking, but we haven't gotten to movement yet. We're in the movement phase. Reinforcements is specified here. We're going to have a problem with this in a bit. Starting with the Prussian player, each player alternates selecting and moving a unit. Each time a unit moves, it can spend up to all the movement points listed on its unit counter. Units in march formation and battle formation have different movement points. Units move from hex to adjacent hex, and most hexes cost 1 movement point in order to enter. Forests, swamp may be an issue. I don't remember. Again, no TEC yet, so I can draw one. I have enough information.
Pieces may spend less movement points than listed on the counter, or none at all, but can never exceed their listed movement points. Units in march formation which move entirely along connected roads pay 0.5 per hex they enter. Units cannot mix normal movement or road movement. There's some... You could make some argument about, what about, shouldn't these special cases, like the units in march formation, shouldn't that be a special sub-case or something like that? I think this works fine, especially in a simple rule book like this. It's like the old SPI, Napoleon's Art of War, or whatever. I don't think you have to be an absolute slave to the case system. It worked well under Dunnigan's leadership because he ensured that every rule book followed a certain, a certain set of this goes here, this goes here. So usually you could just kind of skim over parts of it without knowing anything. It's one of the things that it actually is making more modern games more difficult, though, is that I got used to that Dunnigan dictum, and knew where to find what I needed to find in every single case in an SPI game. And then when I walked away and, went to an Avalon Hill game or something, it just seemed like they didn't know what order to put things in. It was a valid order, perhaps, but yeah. And, a small company like this isn't going to be able to enforce something across enough games for it to matter. So maybe this lighter style is fine, but I wish we would standardize on the Dunnigan system. Unfortunately, I think more people played Avalon Hill games, so. Okay. When a friendly unit moves into an enemy zone of influence, the friendly unit must cease movement, and if in march formation, switches to battle formation. This is a zone of influence, 2 hexes away. So here's a second effect of the zone of influence, which should have been called out. At least with a reference, 4.2c or whatever. Okay. An exhausted cav unit must stop movement if it enters an enemy zone of influence. Friendly units in march formation that begin their movement in an enemy zone of influence, and those whose first hex of movement is not in an enemy zone of influence, may stay in march formation. Otherwise, the unit will flip because it's either moving into a zone of control or a zone of influence and cease movement. Units in march formation in an enemy zone of control must immediately flip to battle formation. Any unit in an enemy zone of control must be placed in battle formation. Units in an enemy zone of control may not move further in the movement phase. So here we hit... No. The friendly unit must cease movement. I thought we were missing something. Yeah. Because since your movement points change, do you have that one remaining movement point would be the question. You do not. You must cease movement when entering into a zone of influence. That's going to slow down. Like, you're going to actually come forward, deploy, and not be able to attack, giving the enemy a chance to withdraw. Kind of an interesting situation. Maybe they can engage. Indeed, they will be able to. A unit which begins its movement outside the range of its friendly headquarters must move closer to its headquarters. Okay. Meaning the unit must move to reduce the total number of hexes between it and its headquarters counter. All right. We have a color alignment. Here, presumably here, with each headquarters. Maybe not. I'm not seeing a white headquarters. There it is. We have a color alignment on the bands. That has not been called out yet. And I believe that is the distinguishment that units with the colored band are part of that headquarters. Let's keep going. Until they are within its range. No units may voluntarily move outside their friendly headquarters range During their movement phase, nothing happens if a friendly or enemy unit or marker enters a hex with the headquarters marker. Whenever a player is eligible to move a unit, that player must move a unit or pass. If a player passes, he won't be able to move any more pieces during the movement phase. Headquarters never move, but are removed and replaced each command phase. That's okay. It's kind of in a random place, but yeah, I can see why you'd want it there. Once a player has passed, the other player determines the maximum number of unit moves remaining by rolling one six-sided die and adds a DRM for each friendly unit that is not in an enemy zone of control, and one for each reinforcement yet to enter the map that turn. Uh-oh. Okay. 4.2a is reinforcements enter the map. There is an implication there that is done before anything else. And somehow, I think this structure has to be pulled out and put under 4.2, not under its own category. And indeed, this part as well, which is to say E and F are controlling factors to everything else. They should be first. Reinforcements should come as a subcase to them, along with, B should also be outside of there. So B, E, and F need to be pulled out of this if reinforcements are not moving first. If reinforcements are moving first, this makes sense. But I definitely got the feeling that all the reinforcements enter, since they're all Prussian, no biggie, and then you start moving things. Okay. Let's keep going here. Okay, so +1 for each reinforcement yet to enter the map that turn. The modified result is the maximum number of unit moves that the player may conduct. Move attack remaining can be used to record this. The movement phase ends once that maximum has been reached or the player passes. Remember, any reinforcements that have yet to enter the map must do so before any other units on the map may move. Okay, remember? Who told me that? Okay, let's look here again. So, there's nothing here that says reinforcements have to enter first. My assumption was all reinforcements entered before anybody did any movement. Nothing really supports that, but that was my assumption because it says reinforcements enter the map, talks about how they do so, then it says starting with the Prussian player, each player alternates selecting one movement. The structure of this needs to be fixed. If all reinforcements need to enter first, that should also be spelled out. So in that BEF section that is going to get pulled out, or I think needs to get pulled out, that needs to be spelled out. That note that, you must move all your reinforcements in ER order, which is worse, before you move anything else on the board. And again, I kind of got that implication from the positioning. It appears to be an intention, but it also appears to be part of this whole structure of alternating moves, that the Prussians are going to bring their reinforcements in one at a time, and the Austrians get to move a unit, in fact, perhaps must move a unit in between those. Okay. Voices going, batteries dying. It's time for me to break. Okay. I fucked around in the yard a little bit, which is better than I've been doing. I feel like getting away from Aspirin Essling, getting away from the NBS series is only for the best. Unfortunately, I have a couple more I have to do in it, even after Aspirin Essling. Okay. Like with movement, very similar system. You can attack multiple times. There's no movement allowances in the sense that, like, things can just go across the whole map if nothing gets in their way. And things can fight as many times as they want. And that's in the course of a 2-hour turn, which may be a little bit optimistic. Like, you could build situations very easily, like with no units on the map or something, the combat's going to be such an abstraction that you don't have to worry. What does it matter if it's, one die roll or 6, right? But with the movement, I think you could probably cross the map more quickly than you should be allowed to. However, there's a limitation. If the other guy isn't on the board at all, somehow, you only get your D6 or D6 plus 1 or, D6 plus units number of actions. So you won't be moving everything across the map too much, but you might have some units that you can that you can, put some nitro on or something. However you want to put that. So clearly you can create unrealistic, unbelievable stuff, I think, with this system. It's not a simulation of all the subsystems that works perfectly. And I'd call this design for effect when you start seeing that kind of bullshit, right? And I don't say that in a bad way. Every game has to have bullshit in it. Okay. And this, because it's an opposed situation, you may never see the bullshit actually happen, and therefore it might be acceptable. Okay. After the movement phase is completed, the Prussian player designates one unit in an enemy zone of control. Exception, see bridges. So I don't know if there actually is an exception there. 3.10.2. Zones of control do not cross bridges, but units can attack. Okay, that's why you need an exception, because you're allowed to attack across bridges even if you're not in a zone of control. Which is a weird way to put this, right? It's clear again to someone who's used to war games, but someone who's not might see this exception and be confused by how it works out. After the attack is conducted, the Austrian player can do the same, and it alternates between players. The player declaring the attack is the attacker, the opposing player is the defender. Each attack is one friendly unit in an enemy zone of control. Exception, see bridges. Attacking, and I don't know if it, I feel like there should be something there, but, we're smart enough to avoid being confused by that. Attacking one adjacent enemy. Cav units can only declare attacks against other Cav units unless conducting a death ride charge. Well, again, a death ride charge is just a normal battle with greater cost. So it's not, again, there's not some kind of special requirement to get you to do that, which feels a little weird the way it's been worded throughout this. I don't know how to fix that. But they always defend from attack regardless of source. Attacks are conducted in the following sequence. Artillery support declaration. Both players will secretly select their artillery commitment, either on the yes or no side. Doesn't say yes, but... and then they reveal their choices. You cannot reveal a yes if you have no artillery points available. Good to clarify that. Sometimes I read things like that and I'm like, well, duh. But, you need it because there's rules lawyers out there. If only one player chose to commit artillery support, they add 2 to their attack resolution die roll and reduce their AP by 1. If both players chose, they each lose an AP, then they each roll a die. Whoever has the higher result will get 2 added to their attack resolution, with the Austrian player winning ties in the white section of the turn track. I like it better the way it's worded until turn 5, but anyway. This is showing the Austrians had higher numbers of artillery with greater range. However, the advantage became mute. No, change that to moot. When the majority of Prussian forces came into close contact with Austrian forces, and the advantages of rapid-fire breech-loading Prussian artillery, which is not everything they had, became clear. If you roll a 6 during the artillery duel, the other player loses 1 additional AP. They say it's bad ammo. Might also be exploding Casians. I don't know. Attack resolution. Each player, I don't know which is more likely. You know, each player rolls a die and adds the DRMs listed below, and hopefully we'll have the terrain here if there are any. I don't see any. Artillery support's worth 2. Attacking, defending in a bridge hex. Okay, there are no bridge hexes. It says -1 DRM. It should be so this is just bad, right? There's a -1 DRM for attacking or defending in a bridge hex. That means both players are affected by it, as far as I read it. That's not what's intended. What's intended is certainly the attacker is going to get a -1 DRM. The defender maybe is supposed to get a +1 DRM. Is it a 2-point swing? I don't know. But if it was a 2-point swing, it should just say attacking in bridge hex -2 DRM. Or defending, well, it shouldn't say hex, first of all. It should be attacking across bridge hex side. Not hex. Flank infantry support. Attacker per infantry unit in enemy zone of control. So every infantry that the attacker has in addition to their first one. And this reminds me of the old Lee versus Grant, right? And some other games where, Korea too, where units adjacent aren't actually committed to the fight, but they add to your combat capability, and they're assumed to be fighting. And it's a really neat concept, and I'm glad this got carried over. ER, plus a die roll modifier equal to the number of stars on the unit's counter. Headquarter support plus the DRM equal to the headquarter if it's in attack mode, which is just additional stars. Okay. Now we get to exhaust cavalry, which is just kind of stuck in a silly place. It feels like attack resolution includes this. And exhaust cavalry should come afterwards. I'm not entirely sure. Any cav that provided a DRM in combat is now flipped to the exhausted side. It doesn't really matter, but we've got this rule 6.2 that's going to handle this, and we've got issues here. Both attackers and defenders. Okay, let's take a look at 6.2 because I called this out and said there's an issue here. And if we look at 6.2, there's this. Attacking units receive a +1 DRM for each fresh cavalry units in defenders EZOC. Okay. Now I've got that marked as being ambiguous, whether or not that applies to the attacking cavalry unit in a death ride. That unit would be in the defender's enemy zone of control. I don't think that's the intention, but it's written in a way that would say that happens. Defending units receive a +1 DRM for each fresh cavalry unit adjacent to the hex they occupy. Again, you know, everything is here except for this cav roll, which kind of sucks, but I don't know what you can do about that. Exhausted cav don't provide a DRM in combat. Exhausted cav recover from exhaustion at the start of a new turn as long as they're not in an enemy EZOC's EZOI. Defending supporting cavalry units do not become exhausted after combat. This is a direct contradiction to this, I think. Any cav that provided a DRM is flipped to its exhausted side, both attackers and defenders. Hold on. Defending cavalry units are not flipped after being attacked. They would not provide a DRM support, +1 DRM for each fresh cavalry adjacent to the hex they occupy. That would not include the actual unit. You see, that's very carefully written. Now, this says defending supporting cavalry units do not become exhausted after combat, which is against this. Both any cav that provided a DRM, both attackers and defenders would be flipped. One of those is correct. I'm tempted to say the defending supporting cav should be exhausted, because for them to provide the effect that they have to do a countercharge. That may not be the intention, but that's what I'm going to do. Okay. Anyway, the two rules are directly in contradiction. It's a playtest, man. What it's all about is finding these things. The player with the higher modified die result. Okay, yeah, I read it correct. I read it how it should be. The player with the higher modified result. Typo. Wins the attack and ties or stalemates. Subtract a lower modified total from the higher modified total and determine the result based on the differential. And this is why you don't want this attacking / defending across bridge hex side. You want it to be one way. You want it to be so. It either should be a -1 DRM for attacking across a bridge hex side, or a -2 DRM, because it doesn't make any difference. And that way it can be clear doing this, you wouldn't really be defending across a hex side. That feels kind of weird. Just putting a single modifier, but I don't know whether it's supposed to be a -1 or -2 for the attacker. Okay. On a 0, you get a stalemate. I guess nothing happens. Again, newer players, newer to wargaming, they might need a little better. Just say nothing happens, next player gets to pick something, or whatever. +1, +2, the unit with the lower result must retreat. If the unit cannot retreat, treat as a blown result. We don't know how retreats happen, that'll be in a moment. +3 to +4 is blown. On the 5th and 6th turn of the game, it's eliminated instead. This has an issue coming up later as well. +5 or more eliminated, remove the unit from the game. If the defending hex is vacated and the attacker is not in an EZOC, the attacker must enter the vacated hex by performing advance after combat, and that'll be covered here. And I don't mind this kind of repetition, It's telling me, and then the details come fairly soon after, so it's good. Okay. Retreats. Units that retreat must move 3 hexes away from the wiener of the attack. I just want to call him a wiener. Retreating units may never enter a hex with another friendly or enemy unit. Headquarters are not units. If the second hex entered during a retreat is defensible terrain hex, that is not defined. I'm assuming something that gives a defensible modifier. There are none listed here except across bridges. Is that the case everywhere? Towns give a bonus. I want to put that over here. Woods give a bonus. So I'm going to call those defensible terrain hexes. Again, just using my reasonableness. But I want +1 def woods, +2 def town. And this might be on the actual terrain effects chart. It just hasn't made it into the rules or whatever yet. Okay. I just don't have that. Okay, where are we? We're on retreat somewhere. If the second hex is defensible, the unit may cease its retreat. Each hex of a retreat must take the retreating unit further from the enemy unit. If a retreating unit cannot move further from the enemy unit, cannot avoid entering an enemy zone of control. This is the first place we're mentioning you can't retreat into an enemy zone of control. A little bothered by that, but okay. Cannot avoid entering a hex with another unit, friendly or enemy. Stacking has not been defined in this game yet. Probably should tell me early on, at least that I remember, that you can't stack. That has interesting implications on movement. Can you stack while moving? Can you stack while retreating? Looks like you can't stack while retreating, but maybe you can stack during movement? I don't remember seeing that. Yeah, I see no claims, and I see nothing against stacking at all. So that needs to be added. Or must retreat beyond the range of its headquarters. Wow, that's weird. The retreat movement ends and the unit becomes blown. Possibly destroyed, I would assume. I think there's some place where it says units that become blown in the on the last 2 turns of the game are gone forever. But it may just be this. Actually, this is weird. It's only on the 5th and 6th turn, not the 7th turn. Boy, that's odd. I don't know if... I think that's supposed to be 6th and 7th turn. Maybe the game was only supposed to be 6 turns at first and got shifted. So that is something... I'll mark. You know, normally when I do copy editing, when I used to do it as work, I would write my notes, you know, all over the page and just send my notated pages back rather than... But nowadays that doesn't make a lot of sense, and especially with me doing it on video. Okay, I'm gonna swap video. I'm gonna swap batteries before we get into this. I think we've covered the retreats entirely. Looking to my personal sanity and whatnot, it may be that I just don't enjoy playing games anymore. Because I'm not actually playing this, I'm just going through the rules and cutting through them and critiquing them. Okay. If a defender vacates a hex due to any attack result, the attacking unit is not in an enemy zone of control of another enemy unit. Uh-oh. Okay, that's covered here. I wanted to make sure that exclusion was there. Then the attacker must immediately perform an AAC. Yeah, we really don't need an abbreviation for this. By advancing into the vacated hex. A unit which advances into the EZOC of an enemy unit may continue attacking in any subsequent attack opportunities as long as the friendly unit is in an EZOC and its owner is not passed. I assume they mean passed in the game and not died. Okay, so probably needs to say this is the only time an advance after combat is allowed, because I get the feeling you're not supposed to be allowed to advance after combat if you attack a unit, force it to retreat, but you're in an enemy zone of control. But that's not specifically excluded. On the other hand, nowhere is it allowed, so, you know, technically you could say, well, the rules support that view anyway. Blown. Okay, this is a combat result. I would almost prefer for these things, for a different organization, you know, again, I don't like this, hey, let's put a big header and then a sentence, you know, or two. That's going a bit too far. I don't mind a number result, especially if it's deep enough in, but this is really retreats after. Yeah, these are all results to here. This is no longer a result, though. This has reached a different level, right? Just looking at the numbering thing. The attack phase is 4.3. Everything under it is attacks. But these are the results of an attack. Retreats, advance after combat, blown, and eliminated, which I feel are a part of, and I'm looking for something, what should be 4.31 here, how to conduct the attacks, or it's actually 4.31E. These are all subsequent to 4.13E, 4.3E, sorry, no 1, 4.3E, whereas 4.35 here is not. This is part of 4.3 itself. You see what I mean there? And again, there's a structural problem with that, at least conceptually. Okay, I don't know how much confusion it would cause, but all these big bars make it look, you know, like, and yes, we're looking at, you know, this quarter's profits, and this is this quarter's costs, and, you know, and then we have one, and this is this quarter's interest paid, which really should be a cost. Why is it its own? You know, that kind of thing. Right. Okay. Pass. Once a player chooses to pass, that player may no longer declare any attacks for the remainder of the attack phase. They can still defend against attacks as normal. If they couldn't, what would happen? After a player passes, the opposing player rolls a die. The result is the number of attacks the non-phasing player can make for the remainder of the attack phase. Again, that can be recorded with this thing. That's not specified, although it was earlier. Okay. End phase. After both players have passed during an attack phase, the turn's over. If this was turn 6, determine the winner of the game. Yeah. I'm not sure turn 7 should exist. I don't know if the error is that turn 7 was put on here, or that the rule book is written for turn 6. I will try to... So here's one of the problems. There's like some additional cav that comes in on turn 6. We'll figure out what to do. It doesn't really matter for the playtest purposes, I think. Okay, otherwise advance the turn marker and begin a new turn. Okay, the following special rules are used in Königgrätz. I'm guessing everything else is largely lifted from his Tour Le Mans or whatever, his other game that was derived from the Mark Herman concept. But I'm not positive, because I think Gettysburg had one set of rules, Waterloo had another, had a revision of the rules, and I get the feeling that this was based on the revision, so maybe some of the central earlier rules are gone. Feels a little weird to have special rules when this is not a scenario in a series, but okay. At the beginning of the game, the Prussians start with 10 artillery points, Austrians 16. The Austrian player doesn't get any. Every turn a new Prussian army arrives on the battle, the Prussians get 2 additional. Well, a new Prussian army arrives on turn 1 and turn 4, the way I count it, which means, I don't know, you know, that every turn would only happen once if turn 1 wasn't one of the turns in which a new Prussian army shows up. On the other hand, it seems kind of odd to give you your points on turn 1 and say you get 2 more on this turn. Just a bit of weirdness. I don't know what can be done about it. I feel like maybe some clarification is needed somehow, though. Each time a player commits artillery support during an attack, they lose 1 AP. During a duel, a 6 causes your opponent to lose an additional 1. Once you have no more AP, you remove the marker from the game. Now, is it possible for the Prussians to run all theirs out before turn 4? Yeah, maybe. In which case, because there's no limit to the number of battles, in which case, I don't know, if their marker's removed from the game, can they still get those 2 points? Almost sounds like no, but I don't think that's the intention. Each time a player commits, and there is a 0 space. Each time a player commits artillery support, yeah, we did that. Okay, the Austrian player has to spend an AP when they use the bombardment marker. And you can never have negative AP. Cav units can only declare an attack against another enemy cav unit. Okay, but they can always defend from an attack. Whether attacking or defending, cav units cannot choose to receive artillery support and will always choose no support. That's a big deal. I almost feel like you might want a reminder in here on the artillery support declaration. Going back to the cav rule. Okay, so this is false. Because there are death rides. And they're not noted there. Attacking units receive a +1 DRM for each fresh cavalry unit in the defender's Zach. Like I said, that's ambiguous. Does that include the attacking cav unit itself, because that will have to be in the defender's EZOC. So does cavalry always get a +1 DRM in combat? Defending units get 1 for fresh cav. We talked about this. Exhausted cav do not provide a DRM in combat. They recover from exhaustion at the start of the new turn as long as they're not in the EZOC or EZOI. Defending supporting cavalry units do not become exhausted after combat. Like I said, there's a problem there. Austrian bombardment fire. They have their bombardment fire marker. It's Austrian artillery tactics during the battle. The Austrian bombardment fire marker may be placed anywhere on the map at least 3 hexes from a Prussian entry hex. Once placed, the bombardment marker is an EZOC to Prussian units. If placed on an enemy unit, the unit must retreat 2 hexes. If unable to do so, it's blown. It may be placed anywhere on the map at least 3 hexes away from a Prussian entry hex. I've got some concerns here with the fact that an EZOC allows the attacker to attack. I don't think it acts as an EZOC. I think it acts as an EZOC for all purposes except allowing them to attack. Does that need to be spelled out? Again, I don't know. Victory. Victory is determined by casualties. At the end of the game, each eliminated and or blown. Okay, so this is interesting. We'll keep reading and I'll explain why. Eliminated and or blown friendly unit grants your opponent 1 victory point. Okay. So, if a unit is blown in the last 2 turns of the game, it counts as eliminated. So we can put that aside. Which seems to indicate, and I don't think this is the case, I think it seems to indicate that getting a unit blown will cost you a victory point, which means we need a means of tracking victory points, and we don't have one. Now, I could use counters or whatever. What I think was intended is that units that are blown at the end of the turn count against your victory points, even though at other points in the rules they've said a unit blown in turns 5 or 6 is considered eliminated. Person with the larger total at the end of the game wins. Ties go to the Austrian. Then we have an argument for, the armies want to destroy each other rather than take particular locations. That's fine. The reason for this as opposed to and then it's repeated. So we should probably cut one of those 2 duplicate sentences. Units begin play in the hex designated on their unit counter. Reinforcements enter on the turns and hex is indicated. The Austrian player starts with 16 AP, the Prussian with 12. Somewhere they should mention the units can set up in either formation or should set up in march or something like that. I'm not positive that absolutely makes a difference because at the beginning of the turn you have an opportunity to convert things, but I don't know. Okay, design commentary. Talking about the Herman evolution, the evolution from the Herman design. And then some sales credits. Not a hell of a lot as to arguing why this design, but again, what attracts the designer to the Herman design? Maybe things Herman hasn't even said would be interesting. And there's plenty of extra space for that kind of wording. Another thing that might be useful is the decision making on the stars. Why one particular unit? Why there's a differentiation in these? Is it simply, hey, they did well? Hi there. Don't eat my woolly bears. Oh, we got. we got a bitchy and a whole bunch of these other guys that I don't know who they are. They're not normal here. They may be migrating. Like, they're not normal on my hill. They may be elsewhere in the town. But anyway, that kind of decision making, whether or not it was just, hey, these were, perhaps armed differently, trained differently, whatever. Something like that might be helpful. Just looking along. So, you've got like two of these Prussian infantry units. And again, I don't know what this 2 is for here. Whether that's supposed to show battalion size or something else. 2 of them are very high quality. One of them is so-so. 2 of them are, not. It would be nice to know, were these conscripts or did they just not perform well? Things like that are always interesting. All right. That is the rules and my copy editing part of this. I'll start moving some pieces around and seeing how the system plays out. Honestly, I think, from a playtest point of view, that's probably a lot less interesting than fighting through the rules. Because what we're going to, I'm not going to be able to play this enough. Like I said, I'm not going to be able to give a proper playtest. I'm going to play a game of it and see if anything really wacky happens. But for the most part, I don't see how. Yeah, I don't see how anything, there's nothing that glares out and says, wow, this is really not going to work as expected or whatever. Sometimes I can get surprised, but I don't see it here. However, in terms of, hey, how does the game work? What's fun about it? What's cool? That kind of stuff you do kind of see better than just through the rules writing. So, wondering about those birds. I think they may be, my eyes are not good if that's the case. Yeah, see, that one is just one of my little robin things, and those are all over the place, but these other things looked a little too gray, but now I'm looking, and there's a whole horde of them, so I think they're just my robins.